Good afternoon or good evening, wherever part of the country you may be, and welcome to the Boxing Media Hub Fighter Series, coming to you live from Cincinnati, Ohio, here in the United States. Today's subject is none other than another Cincinnati standout, the great Aaron Pryor. Widely regarded as the greatest junior welterweight of all time, Aaron Pryor held the junior welterweight championship for the better half of 4 years. Started his career here in Cincinnati as a stand-up lightweight, who eventually moved his career up to the middle super lightweight division. Actually, before that, he was known for an amateur win over the great Thomas Hearns in the Olympic qualifiers for the 1976 Olympics. Didn't necessarily make it, but still had a stand-up amateur career. Then became a stand-up prize fighter in the junior welterweight division, known out of Cincinnati. Was able to fill out the old Riverfront Coliseum here in Cincinnati from the back end of the 70s, even through the mid 80s, really packing the house. His standout moment was when he won the junior welterweight championship back in 1980, when he knocked out the great Antonio Cervantes in less than 2 rounds to win the championship in a fight where he had to come off the canvas to do it. And basically, Aaron Pryor, from that point on, Aaron Pryor his career just basically took off. Got a win over a fighter named Akito Kamiya in another sellout audience here in Cincinnati, where he stopped him in 3 rounds. But maybe his landmark moment took place in 1981 at the Rose Bowl in Miami, Florida, when he fought the great Alexis Arguello in a breathtaking give and take fight, which saw both fighters give their all back and forth to where it looked like for a minute, Aaron Pryor was going to win the fight. And then Alexis Arguello, being the great fighter he is, came on to make the fight interesting until the end, when Aaron Pryor just put together a vicious 16-punch combination that caused the fight to be stopped and put Arguello on the canvas. The fight was essentially over at the end of the 14th round, where the fight was essentially stopped, and Aaron Pryor retained his junior welterweight title, which basically was the peak of his career at that point. Of course, the controversy that took place during the fight with his then trainer Panama Lewis and the infamous "Give me the bottle, the one I mixed," that was later compensated by the Florida State Athletic Commission. But because of the controversy, 2 years later, there would be a rematch between the two fighters. And basically, it was basically all Aaron Pryor in the rematch, when he basically just poured it on, floored Alexis Arguello 3 times in the fight, en route to a 10th round knockout victory, where Pryor retained his junior welterweight championship. But after that fight, the career life of Aaron Pryor basically hit a stagnant point, where he was basically got hooked on drugs and basically wound up being treated for drug dependency due to his long-standing battles with crack and cocaine. But he did manage to come back to win a vacant championship in basically 2 fights. But after that, he was stopped by a fighter named Bobby Joe Young in the second round, which basically was the end of his terrific and great standout career as a fighter. One of the more vicious fighters of his time, he had speed and power like it was none other. His ability to put combinations to the body and head with such force, and his ability to just put it all together and score knockouts, was second to none. Also, his ability to come off the canvas to win fights like he did against Antonio Cervantes to win the junior welterweight championship was something else. Because when Cervantes floored him, before the ref could even count, he was ready to get up and fight and fire back at Antonio Cervantes. But of course, it couldn't happen because the referee had to do the count. Afterwards, Pryor came back and basically knocked out Antonio Cervantes at a time where it looked like Cervantes had the fight won. Basically, like the time that Cervantes knocked Pryor down was like a distant memory, because Aaron Pryor was just that guy at the back end of the 70s and the early 80s. It was said widely regarded as the greatest junior welterweight of all time. When I think of some of the Cincinnati icons, Ezra Charles, as I mentioned last week, was number one. This guy's right behind him as we talk about the great boxers that come out of here. We had guys like Tony Tubbs. We had Rasheed Wells, Adrian Bronner, and the list goes on and on. But Aaron Pryor was just a man amongst boys when it comes to the sport of boxing, and some of the athletes that have come out of Cincinnati, Ohio. Just a standout fighter, two-time super lightweight champion. You know, a distinguished amateur career as well. Got the win over Hearns at a fight where people thought Hearns won, so they could try and get the represent the U.S. in the 1976 Olympics. Pryor never got to the quite to the medal round, but still had a distinguished amateur career, solid professional career as well. Two-time champion, and the accolades with him go on and on. Of course, his career after boxing was, one where he hit the rock bottom, got hooked into alcohol and drugs, wound up doing time in the Pickaway prison over here in the state of Ohio, which is, of course, common with a lot of fighters. But when he got out, he stayed clean and sober for the remaining 23 and a half years of his life, became a well-known preacher here in Cincinnati, still an iconic figure among the all-time great athletes to come through here in Cincinnati. We talk about, of course, Ezra Charles, Oscar Robertson, Anthony Munoz, Ken Anderson, Johnny Bench, Joe Morgan, Ken Griffey Sr., Luciano Acosta. You can add, obviously, Aaron Pryor to that list because he was still loved here in Cincinnati, and he still lived here till when he passed away in 2016. But maybe his biggest victory was taking down sobriety and being sober for the remaining 23 years, was basically trumped anything he did in his boxing career. But his boxing career was a second to none. Two-time super lightweight champ, widely regarded as the greatest super lightweight of all time. And in all of these mythical fantasy matchups, like everybody likes to do in the boxing community so much, in these weight classes, I probably would favor him over virtually anybody, whether it be a Floyd Mayweather, Julio Cesar Chavez, Manny Pacquiao. List goes on and on and on, just simply because Aaron Pryor did it all. His speed was second to none. His punching power was second to none. His ability to put combinations together was second to none. He can box. He could come forward. He absolutely did it all. Of course, the peak was the two fights with Alexis Arguello. Obviously, the first one in 1981, where it was basically a give and take fight both ways down at the Orange Bowl in Florida. And Pryor just walked out with a junior welterweight championship in a fight that looked like he was going to lose. Probably his finest hour, the first fight with Arguello. Just a standout fighter, just a terrific fighter who basically was one of the premier's fighters of all time. His best opponent, it's to me still Alexis Arguello. Maybe at his peak, you could probably say when he won the title from Antonio Cervantes, because nobody talks about Cervantes as a top all-time junior welterweight, but he's basically the top 10 himself. And Pryor, after Cervantes knocked him down, dusted him off like it was nothing. I mean, Cervantes was that dude, and he did for Pryor, but as I said, Aaron Pryor dusted him off, wiped him out like he didn't belong to the same ring as him. I mean, he was one of the prototypical guys who can just turn it on in the snap, and that's why I pick him over anybody all time in the mythical junior welterweight fights of all time. I mean, Pryor was a father at 15. Yes, he was. Of course, his son tried to have a standout career himself, not necessarily didn't stand out the legacy that his father had, because Aaron Pryor just had a surreal legacy that was second to none. I mean, his son it tried it, didn't amount to much, but as we say in the sport, it's hard for the son of a great fighter to uplift to the standards that the father had, especially when we talk about the greatness of a guy like Aaron Pryor. That was some real big shoes for Aaron to fill, and that was basically all she wrote for Pryor Jr. But for Aaron Pryor Sr., terrific all-time great fighter. The all-time pound-for-pound fighters, probably somewhere in your top 50. I mean, some people have the top 30, a top 25. I don't know how far I would go up, simply because to the criteria that is a title, we talk about all-time greats. But certainly a legit all-time great, was a first ballot Hall of Famer, the chance he got in, rightfully so. I think he went in 1996, and his career and legacy was a second to none. I mean, great fighter, great memories, knew how to pack the house here in Cincinnati, because that Riverfront Coliseum, you snap the fingers, that place is sold out. especially when you had at the time when the big red machine of the Cincinnati Reds was the hot deal. Aaron Pryor was also a hot ticket, and he knew how to sell. And he did that quite well before, during, and after a fight. And when he got in that ring, he was also must-watch TV. You couldn't miss out on the great Aaron Pryor. And may God rest the soul of Aaron Pryor, because he was beloved much here in Cincinnati. Thanks for all the memories. We all love you, Aaron Pryor, aka the Hawk. And the final tradition, what he would love to do during referees' introductions: fist out, taunting your opponent. That's the salute to Aaron Pryor. Thank you so very much, Aaron Pryor. We all love you here in Cincinnati. And that will conclude matters of the Fighter series on the great Aaron Pryor. Hope everyone has themselves a wonderful rest of the day. Take care of yourselves and enjoy the day.